Oh, hi there. I didn't see you. Hey, while you're here, if you don't mind, could I read a poem to you real quick? One that I wrote myself, if that's okay with you? Once again, for the first time, I open my eyes and I look to the stars. I awake to a campfire at the end of the universe. And when I travel to Cosmos, and eventually our beautiful sun explodes, I'll remember you and me and everything we love right before the universe goes cold.
Outer Worlds, not to be confused with the better version of Starfield, the Outer Worlds is an indie space exploration game originally developed by Alex Beecham as a thesis for his master's degree at USC Interactive Media and Game Division. The idea of this game was that the game over time would change regardless of what the player did, making that game less centered around the player themselves. The universe does not care for your input, and on top of this, the game itself wouldn't have any missions, as Alex was completely inspired by pure space exploration. In May of 2013, Alex would graduate, leaving the game as an old project, but would eventually find himself a job at Mobius Digital, which was luckily founded by his classmates Lone Renault, who also happened to work on the Outer Wilds project. Mobius Digital would mainly make mobile games at the time, but since they saw Outer Wilds at the USC exposition, most of the crew were heavily impressed by the game, so they went ahead and worked on it as a side project. The team would eventually submit the game to the Independent Games Festival in 2015, where it would go on to win an Excellence in Design alongside the Seamus McNally Grand Prize, which was the main award given out at the festival. After seeing this positive reception, Mobius Digital would go on to focus on polishing the game and releasing it mainly on Windows. But during this year, a publishing studio by the name of Annapurna Interactive would buy out the rights of this game and would turn this student project into a real fleshed out game, and would delay this game's original release in 2016 all the way to 2019, where we would see this game released on PC alongside Xbox One as well. Now, really quick, I'd like to tell you the story about the first time I ever played Outer Wilds alone, heard of it. The first time I ever heard of Outer Wilds, I was a senior still in high school, and at the time, one of my nerdiest friends started to nerd out to me about this awesome game named Outer Wilds that he couldn't tell me anything about, as if he were, it would to ruin the experience. Now, at the time, I had no idea what he was really on about, and honestly, it took me way longer than it should have to listen to him. But one day, he managed to get another one of our friends to play it, and after this said friend finished the game, I sat there as they excitingly discussed how cool this game was and how much they love it. And as I sat there clueless over the Xbox Live party, I realized I had nothing to lose, so I said, fuck it. One day after work getting home, I decided that I wanted to see what this game was all about, and so I booted up Outer Wilds, and off the bat, you were greeted by the vast deaths of stars as the camera pans down and the campfire is lit, lighting a spinning planet it resides on while the title of Outer Wilds appears. And something really cool about this title is that the longer you stare at it, the words start to break apart and flow off into space, a really cool detail that I love to see in games, especially similar to the Halo 5 grunt Easter egg or the Star Stardew Valley's ability to click on the concerned ape. And after a couple hours of playing, I was hooked and couldn't put the controller down. Then hours later, and when I got on for after school and work for the next couple days until I had beaten the game, I found myself with this experience that made me feel the most emotion I have felt in a video game since, an experience that I can never experience for the first time ever again. And so now with this video, I'd love to perhaps give you that experience if you're not a gamer, or if you already played through this masterpiece of a game, to hopefully relive some of the magic that this game once brought you. And so with that being said, sit back and enjoy as I will dive deep into the universe of Outer Wilds. Also at this point, I would like to give a spoiler warning for those of you who haven't played this game before, and would like to, I would plan to dive into the entire lore and universe of this game, so please, if you want to experience this on your own without spoilers, please go ahead and play the game first, then feel free to come back and watch this video. Upon starting a new game, your eyes open up above you, an explosion, and things start to fly into the distance, but mainly it's just a distant planet among all the stars. As you arise from your sleeping bag with a campfire ahead of you, a fire rages on, and on the other side seems to be an alien, but to you, they are a friend. This is Slate, who seems to be wearing a welding mask. We can start by talking to him. Slate is what we call as Hearthians. This is our species, and these are the people we will find ourselves familiar with during the events of this game. After talking to Slate, we can look around. On one side of us is an elevator. We can't take it as we don't have the launch codes, so we must head the other way, where we can jump up a few little cliff edges until we run into another one of our kind. And upon looking over the hill, we get a glimpse of the Hearthian village, with geyser pools shooting up in the middle. Cliff sides surrounding the craters are littered with buildings, and numerous waterfalls slowly trickle into the valley. This is the Hearthian village, and our species originate out of this village. And here is where we'll start every time we boot up this game. As we explore the village, we get to chat with our four-eyed alien friends and talk about our journey, but every member in the village only has one topic to talk to us about: our very first spaceflight. In Outer Wilds, you are part of a cute alien species who just freshly discovered spaceflight and the ability to leave their own planet and explore their own solar system around them. You yourself are a Hearthian that everyone refers to as hatchling, for whatever reason that might be. As you explore this village, one thing becomes very apparent. This is your tutorial. As a gamer, I always find tutorials to be hit or miss, but for the most part, I find them to be very annoying, especially if they are forced. Now, I do understand the point of tutorials. You don't want your player base to complain about their game because they were too impatient to go to tutorial option, or some random IGN reviewer to dog on your game. But specifically, Outer Wilds tutorial, it's a tutorial that I very much so find myself enjoying, and for quite a few reasons. As you go throughout the village, the tutorial is showed you as a little journey, almost free to you as you walk around and talk to whoever you want, and most of the conversations feel real and grounded to the topic at hand. But something I cherish is that if you're a maniac, then you could just walk past everyone and everything and head straight to the observatory, which after speaking to Slate once, waking up, he immediately tells you that this is your first destination. Nothing necessarily stops you from doing what you want in this game, and for that is a topic that I'll heavily touch on later. For those of you who do stop and talk to your fellow species and friends, stopping around and checking things out is how you actually learn about the mechanics of the game you're about to play, before you really even do anything. For example, after popping over those little cliffs and heading to the top of the hill, you'll meet a Hearthian by the name of Mika, who will let you fly her little model rocket around the village and quest you with landing it on one of the geyser pools. This is a playful version of how to fly your ship when the time comes. Or when heading a little past the bridge, you come across two younger Hearthians hanging out on a porch. Talking to them, you'll talk about how they want to play hide and seek, but another Hearthian won't let them borrow their signal scope. So saying yes launches you into a hide and seek, or using a tool called the signal scope, you're tasked with tracking down their radio signals and finding where they are. And this little game of hide and seek teaches you how to use your signal scope in order to track down various signals throughout your journey. These signals are backed up by another conversation with an older Hearthian in a rocking chair by the name of Nice. It tells you that there are actually other Hearthians out in the cosmos waiting for you, and that if you point your signal scope up into the sky, you could actually hear them playing on a different planet. Moseying up to the top of the scaffolding, you'll come across a kid throwing rocks into a field of teal crystals, and that, in conversation with him, and also reinforced by a little post next to the fence, this is a deadly substance that is lethal to your species called ghost matter, and using a stationary camera next to it, revealing that only in photos taken can you see a dense cloud floating over it. And if you go up to this little platform, you could come across the fire watchtower, where a stationary camera sits in the middle, surrounded by 4 different posted signs, each reading a different landmark for direction. Getting on the camera, unlike the previous one, one allows you to launch this camera in the specific direction you're aiming in order to check things out. This is the first look we get at the different locations on our own planet, but we are yet to venture out to them. By using this camera and the one by the ghost matter field, we get a brief look at our scout launcher, which is a little portable camera that we can fire out at different things in our environment to get more information. Now, we don't have access to it yet, soon we will. And as we continue down the boardwalk to the observatory that lies upon the top of the crater, we find a note on a direction sign telling us to go give our old structure a visit before we take off. Walking into a little cave, we find a Hearthian by the name of Gossan. This, according to our conversation, is Gossan, the one who taught us how to fly. Talking to Gossan, they inform us that we should take the elevator down into the mine shafts in order to get one more test of flying around in 0G before doing the real thing. So taking Gossan's advice, we travel down the elevator to where we appear in pure darkness. In the darkness, we see little white dots everywhere, feeling as if we're already in the stars. Depending on what gaming system you're playing on, we luckily have alongside ourselves a flashlight just in case we find ourselves in the predicament. Walking through the caves, we get our first look at a spacesuit, which we put on. This spacesuit allows us to obviously breathe without oxygen, but most importantly, it has thrusters, which allows us to fly over greater sized cliffs if needed. And if we boost up further into the cave, we can see on our systems monitor that our gravity is decreasing eventually till we hit 0. And at this point, we're completely in 0 gravity and can practically float in any direction. And looking down below in a deep hole, we can see red flashing in a giant mining device. And that's a point this game doesn't just let us float around, but now we are working with Newtonian physics. For example, now that we are in 0G, if we move forward, unless there is a force to stop us, well then... So having to use our forward thrusters to stop us from slamming into things, we must control ourselves in a sort of unstable environment. Luckily, our suit has our back. If we look at any other of the flashing lights, we can ask our suit to match velocity, which allows us to move better with our destination, if it also happens to be moving itself, or to stop us from just completely floating past it. Going up to the red lights on this giant mining tool, we can hold X to repair the device, and after repairing 3, we hear a loud sound as we have fixed it and can move on. This teaches us how 0G repairing works, as in the future, if we break things on our ship, we can go back and repair it if we have to while floating in space. One little thing I like to point out in this cave is that if we stop and look, we find a little Hearthian down here alone, mining. But if we talk to him, he seems to be distressed about going to that little pit, as the 0G freaks him out and anything close to space does as well, which is interesting to see, as most of the village in of itself seems to be keen and fascinated by the idea of space travel. But this guy doesn't really seem to agree, which is why he remains down here mining as far away as possible from space. Little does he know, his own planet is in space of itself, but I wouldn't want to freak him out anymore. Returning in our suit and heading back up, we get a goodbye from Gossan before finally heading out to the observatory. Moving on, we finally get to our destination where we find ourselves in a hallway. On each wall is a different picture, and at the end of it we see a Hearthian viewing a statue. This is Hal, and he tells us about this newest addition to the museum, a nomai statue. What we see here is our closest look as an alien species by the name of the nomai. Our species is familiar with them, but we don't actually know why they're in our solar system or how, and that's what we find as the significance of the first floor of the observatory. As we finish up talking to Hal, he gives us a nomai translator tool. Apparently he invented it, and it's a prototype, one of a kind type of deal, so he tells us to take care of it. And going into the observatory are numerous different displays giving us glimpse into our solar system and the universe we reside in. A few things in this museum we can look at, for example, is on the right side we find a few display cases, such as a chunk of the wall from the outer rock, our planet's moon, which has nomai writing on it. Thankfully, we can use this translator to see what they were talking about. The nomai seem to write their sentences in weird curved blue lines. Not only this, but the nomai also seem to enjoy art, depicted by this vase over here. On top of this, our species are able to tell that we didn't descend from the nomai, as they had 3 eyes and hair unlike our species. Against the wall in the back is a blue crystal that if we jump on the wall, changes our sense of gravity, allows us to basically wall ride. According to the post before it, the nomai must have used these to get around terrain. And in glass display near the wall, we find what seems to be a tiny anglerfish. We know it's obviously not alive here. We can see that apparently this tiny little thing was attached to one of the ships that flew past, one of the planets in our solar system, Dark Bramble. On various walls of the museum, we see various portraits of things and people familiar to our solar system. For example, on the wall here, we see what seems to be a weird ruins-like structure, or if we head back to the hallway, we have what seems to be a flag planet on the moon, as this was our species' first expedition off to the planet itself. Across from this is a older style portrait of various astronauts in the Outer Wild Space Venture program, all signed by the founding members. Under this, interestingly enough, lie a few loose pieces of paper stapled stapled to the wall. If you read it, this is actually a little thank you from the developers of this game to the ones who helped fundraise for the game. And interestingly enough, has even Omwrecker in it for any of those familiar with the Vanos crew, and hopefully not the drama that ensued. And finally, with a separate door that leads outside from the museum, we see 3 tree stumps with one of them having a rock on it. If we go to the sign, we read that apparently the rock reacts to conscious observation, and that most people who see the rock is some type of optical illusion, except that for one member, he believes that the rock quote-unquote exists in all possible states until it is observed, which confuses the rest. But no matter what, both sides of the debate agree that the phenomenon is creepy, which, after turning around to see the rock is gone, looking around, it turns out the rock is on a different stump, and when I turn back, well, it's gone again. This rock seems to move around if it stops being observed, interestingly enough. And so with weird space rocks being at play, I think it's time we take a pit stop and talk about so far what we have seen in this long period of a tutorial. If you're like me, then you probably tried to explore as much of this place on your first playthrough, much like I did, and to my surprise, it took me almost an hour to get through the tutorial just because the developers put so much time and effort and information into this museum. And so with what we have experienced so far, we have a big portion of our game showing to us through the tutorial with teaching us how to use different tools we come across, or in the event, navigate the features of our solar system for when we go explore it. Now, alongside teaching us about our world that we reside in and the mechanics we will come across on our adventures, I'd like to talk about some cool details that stem from a developer point of view. In this tutorial, a few things here are actually, believe it or not, little projects that Alex Beecham previously used in certain assignments during his time in the University of South California. For example, when you first talk to Mika and fly the model rocket, believe it or not, that is actually part of prompts from Alex's previously mentioned thesis project, where certain prompts, for example, had him do something where he has a tester fly tiny little rockets and eventually get into a bigger version of it to make it feel scary. Or another interesting one called the uncertainty principle, where he had these trees and cabins that moved around in the woods when they weren't being observed, which, if that sounds familiar, well, maybe our creepy space rock friend might have something to say. Or even a project where you'd have to throw a probe and have video footage come from it, of which we see relating from the scout launcher on top of the Firewatch. These are examples of things that we see in our tutorial on how we played a game and where they originally stem from, coming from what was once a student project. Now, another topic, if I'd like to talk about, is how in the tutorial, talking to all the people in the village is how you learn about the species themselves and some of the Hearthians' history. But to keep the flow of things, I'd like to move on to our next section of the video, the gameplay of Outer Wilds. Going back to the observatory is where we find ourselves heading upstairs, and when appearing we find ourselves with a large telescope looking out to the stars, and in the roof is a gap where we can see the sky. Here we see various computers all over the place, and in the center room is what seems to be a display of our solar system. This is the first idea of what world we live in, and if we interact with it, we are get brought into this cool introduction to the solar system with our sun in the middle and everything with the various planets orbiting it alongside their displayed path of travel. Backing out near some of the computers, we see a Hearthian that seems to be studying something on the monitors. This is Hornfels. Talking to Hornfels, we finally get our hands on the launch codes, which previously is what Slate mentioned we needed to use the elevator next to where we woke up. Talking to Hornfels will ask us what we plan to do once we are out in the cosmos, and while the game allows the player to choose among various options, I think it's in our best intentions to use our translator tool that Hal worked very hard on to go see exactly what the nomai were up to, just exactly what their goals and origins were all about. Saying farewell to Hornfel, we head back downstairs where on our way out the observatory. We are immediately held in place, and the nomai statue turns and stares us directly in the eyes, everything we previously saw in our last day displayed to us in a short few second span. Then, the nomai's eyes glow blue, then dim and continue staring past us. In our own shock and confusion, we continue heading back towards the elevator when we are stopped in our tracks by Hal again, asking us if we got a good look at the statue, and after telling him what we just saw, he's confused and tells us that we might need some medical check before heading to space. So we just keep moving on. Moving on, we finally make our way to the elevator where we can enter our code and ride up. Up top, we are finally introduced to our ship. This is our mode of transportation for the entirety of this game. So we're gonna be buddies with this wooden coffin. Let's at least get a little comfortable with our ship. The ship as we know it is our main way of traveling around our solar system. Here is where we will spend most of our time in-game flying around from planet to planet. But before we take off into the cosmos, I'd like to look just a bit harder at our beloved spacecraft and see what this thing is all about. As we circle the exterior of a ship, we notice our ship to have everything to expect on a spacecraft, such as a cockpit, thrusters on the sides, a headlight, but what really rocks about with this ship is the choice of material when it comes to the design of the ship. See, whenever I think of going into space, the last thing I think of is using wood as a main component of my ship. The wood of the ship can be seen used as the legs of our ship's landing craft, which also seems to be 3 sticks held together, but what I can only imagine are some sort of ratchet straps. On top of the ship is an antenna, almost likely used for reading signals, which is also held on by wood. And most of the wood appears behind our ship, rather being used as a board to hold down things like our electronics and wires, which hopefully an electrical fire doesn't start, because that would not be awesome in contact with wood. And the other half of the wood seems to be more casing for other things, which I can only imagine is our fuel tanks on the back, hoping these don't mix with the wood either. And so now you can see exactly what I mean when I mention a wooden coffin. But if we look under our ship, we see these magical blue floating rings that also seem to heavily outdate the rest of the materials used on our ship. And if we walk into it, we are lifted inside our ship. Now, something I love in games and in general is having a sort of open ship on the inside. It honestly brings that feeling of like living in a van or having a mobile home, sorta. Inside the ship, we have 4 different directions we can go, but starting with this way, we can see a crystal which looks familiar. It's the same one from the museum, and so I can only assume that this crystal is here to hold us down during spaceflight if we find ourselves waltzing around while not in gravity. Next to it is what I can only imagine is a fuel injector, or regulator of some sort, as it's attached to the thruster outside. Unless it's more of a fuel reader. If anyone else that's smarter than me knows what this actually is, please comment. Turning to our left, we see a flashing blue screen against a wall of monitors. On the right of these monitors is a shelf containing some survival items such as a bundle of wood, some flasks, jugs of what I assume is the sap wine that Porphy makes, and some marshmallows alongside an extra monitor for our setup. On the right side of the monitors, we get a fun little planetary chart of the solar system. Here is where we can get a more picturized view of our solar system. I will say, this would make such a sick poster to have inside the room. And if we finally interact with the blue screen, we are brought into what is our ship log. Our ship log has a few different modes we can cycle through while using it. So for example, you have rumor mode, that while every piece of information we learn on journeys will be compiled into these little bundles of text that we can come back to if we need to remind ourselves of something in our travels. While if we switch to our other mode, we are shown a display of solar systems similar to the planetary charts. This time a lot of planets are dimmed out and we have nothing to read off of them. But for the ones that are showing, these are the planets that we have rather been to, or we have some type of rumor on them. This system is just an easier way to sort all of your rumors by planet specific instead of quest specific, which I'll explain later. And so backing off and going to our left, we will have our next section of the ship, our suit area. Here is where we carry all of our main equipment, such as our suit, but lying around the area is some other fun stuff as well. On the shelf to the right, we have a fun little close-up of what our scout launcher will look like, and on the ground it seems to be a larger reserve of marshmallows, sap lime, and seemingly metal cans of fish, which I find very fun, that it almost seems to be that our species when it comes to long journeys rely mainly on marshmallows and wine to keep ourselves going. On the left, we have a medical station. If in case we get hurt on our travels, or if we need to refuel our suit with the can on the left, we could come back to the station anytime we need and fix ourselves right up. This also contains the most important camping tool of all time, spork. And up top is a sleeping bag. Although we never use it in game, it's a cool addition as well as the other little fun details. And so if we look back to our suit, we can finally put it on, and as we equip our suit, behind it lies a diagram of our scout launcher and how it can come in handy, which I find very fun. Rather, it's seeing what's on the other side of the planet, illuminating dark areas, detecting hazards, or testing the environment. Our little scout is basically extended hand into the universe in order for us to learn how this place works and to survive its challenges. And finally, to the front of the ship lies our cockpit, where here is where our piloting skills come into hand. But before we sit down, if you look to our left, there's a little fun picture on the wall labeled oxygen refill, which according to the laws of the universe, if we need oxygen, all we have to do is walk towards a tree, granted there is one, and boom, we are good. Which is fun, as we have a little plant next to our sign, so that if we ever need oxygen in a minimal tree area, we can walk back into our ship and we will be safe. Looking around our flight systems, we just have a bunch of fun little buttons with multiple indicators telling us things such as our fuel, temperature, and oxygen levels. On the left screen is a diagram of the parts of our ship that if we happen to damage something, they'll turn red and tell us exactly what went wrong. Apparently a good amount of players on their first time don't know this, but if you look to the right, there is a red button. If pressed, ejects yourself from the ship. And so with everything we need to know about our ship, we can finally sit down, buckle in, and take off into the stars. And so when it comes down to traveling our solar system, where exactly do we go? Well, luckily for us, we have two options. A, if we go back into our rumor logs in the back of the ship, we can see that we have a couple of rumors already set depending on who we talk to, assuming we talk to everyone. Odds are, you'll have giants deep in Outer Rock, our moon, and other fellow Hearthians tell you that you should go visit Esker first, as he will be a good tiny start for your journey, but also might need the company. Now for option B is where things get fun. You can go anywhere you want. Yep, you heard it. The game, while giving you suggestions where you should go, truly doesn't care if you go to whatever you want. If you can see it, you can fly to it, rather it be the Hourglass Twins, the random comet flying through our solar system, or even Brittle Hollow, the planet with a lava moon orbiting it. And so with a little bit of decision paralysis on where we should go, maybe I should give you all a quick little introduction on the planets. Going from left to right on our family-friendly planetary chart are the Hourglass Twins. The Hourglass Twins are two planets that are the closest to the Sun in our solar system, and believe it or not, these planets orbit each other, with one planet being the Ash Twin and the other as the Ember Twin. As these planets orbit each other, the Ash Twins dumps its sand onto the Ember Twin in an hourglass-like fashion, hence how it got its name. Now, while the Ash Twin is too sandy to explore for the moment, you can go to the Ember Twin where many mysteries lie, such as a jagged and rocky terrain for you to explore, where split down the middle in the path of travel of a giant moving sand pillar is a massive planet-long ravine, where on the insides lie what seems to be natural and ancient built landscapes for you to explore. Alongside the surface is a high-tech looking structure looming over the horizon, and if one is down here for some spelunking, they might find themselves in the maze-like caverns of this planet, where if one's curiosity peaks, they will perchance come upon a dark ancient city. Second in line is Timber Earth, our species' home planet, where even our planet isn't shy of its own mysteries, as giant geysers in the distance pop off. Multiple craters can be found along the planet side, where numerous oddities lie. Underneath our planet seems to be large channels of fast-paced flowing water, which if we feel like going on little trips, we can find ourselves floating around in here. But if one takes an interesting journey into the wide open top of a massive geyser, they can fly down into what seems to be a landing pad. And if one opens a massive alien-like door, they are greeted with never-ending depths of the dark right under their own planet. And third in line is Brittle Hollow. Brittle Hollow is a very interesting planet, although this one tends to like you less. On the surface of Brittle Hollow, we are greeted by deep blue basalt-like landscape with the highest peaks of this planet to be riddled with glaciers. The south pole of this planet is accompanied by an observatory-looking structure, with another outer wild ship outside its entrance, leaving us clues of where our fellow members might be. If we follow the horizon, we can fall into a crater which seems to be another structure that furthers into the ground of this planet, but just outside this is an almost massive purple rock that is very similar to the ones we saw back on our planet. Now with that, it makes me wonder what's down below the surface of this interesting planet. Well, if we follow the stairways of one of the many structures, we can come across the inside of this planet almost entirely hollow. But if we look down on the inside of this planet is a massive black hole staring back at us. Brittle Hollow is mainly traversed through these blue rings that take you across the different little quests, identical to the ones under our ship. I wonder which one came first. If we travel these rings enough, we find ourselves at different structures, all lying below the surface of this planet. But watch out where you reside, because over time, fragments of the structures tend to break off and fall into the black hole. But why is this? Well, the hostile lava moon named Brittle's Lantern periodically shoots massive flaming balls at the planet that over time break up the rock of the planet and send its remains into the black hole below. So watch your step as you travel, or you might just find yourself down there with it. And next up is the biggest planet in our solar system, Giants Deep, where unlike the rest of the outside of this planet is a giant orb-like shape of green within a horizon with lightning strikes of what seems to be a storm. So heading down into the atmosphere of this planet, a rainy storm planet surrounds us. Looking around are a dozen spiraling tornadoes moving across the almost infinite ocean of this planet. As we scan the ocean side for somewhere to land, we come across a tiny few different islands that we can land on. As we land, we realize that the gravity here is heavy, making it hard to jump or move around besides our ability to walk. The different islands here are all contain something unique to themselves, but as we notice in the center, this planet remains a huge tornado. Larger than any of the other ones roaming around, this one seems to be stationary, and if one tries to enter it, they are just pushed out. Unlike the other tornadoes that if contact is made, well then, Be mindful, as these tornadoes aren't just flight obstacles, but you might just find yourself caught in one while exploring an island, so make sure to find your nearest tornado pod, as you and your island will get a fun little tour of space. And don't fret if you find yourself falling into the ocean, because, well, this isn't Subnautica, but if you do, look deep below as something lies sleeping below the ocean current in the core of this water planet. So last but not least, we have Dark Bramble, and, well, Dark Bramble is perfect for its name because, well, it's dark, and not a lot is going on here from the outside. What we can see is the remains of what is a ice-style planet, now split apart, and what is left is held together by these branch-looking stems, all spreading out from the centerpiece of what looks like a seed. But around the seed are these multiple holes glowing white from them, so curiously, if we head inside, we slowly descend into a space way larger than what the seed looked like from the outside. And so in our confusion, as we fly deeper in, I almost swore I can hear some snoring as... So let's probably not go to Dark Bramble, and before I move on from the planets, there's one more piece of solar system I refuse to leave out. And that's our buddy, the Interloper. While not a planet, it is still registered on our planetary chart as part of the system, as it even has its own path of travel, as it seems to continuously circle the sun in an elliptical orbit. If one is able to land on this fast-paced and small-moving object, they get the chance to go on a ride with it as it hurtles through space. And if one travels to the south pole of this comet, then they might slide across the ice until they come across huge spikes of ice, with almost what seems to be an alien ship stuck inside one. But beyond the fun little slip and slide, when the comet gets close to the sun, pay attention to the cracks of ice between the rocks, as something might open up for you to explore. And so with the astrological bodies of our solar system covered, let's head back into the gameplay of Outer Wilds. Once you have decided what planet you want to explore first, or rumor you want to follow, it all comes down to a matter of going to your map or visually seeing the planet, locking onto it, and you can either engage autopilot to a destination or do it all yourself. But do watch out if you're using the autopilot, because it doesn't have course correction. Now when it comes down to finally lifting off and flying our ship, we firsthand get to see finally what Goss and the Zero-G training was all about. On top of this, Mika's model rocket comes in handy, as now we are here for the real deal. When flying your ship around the solar system, if one locks onto a planet, it could get a reading of the distance of how far they are from said planet, alongside the speed that they are moving at it. But if one is speeding towards a planet but forgets to slow down their forward momentum, then... Fun little callback to the tutorial on how it shows us how the mechanics of the game works, but in a fun, natural way. When arriving to your planet, you can always do two things: rather find something cool on the planet from orbit, or anywhere, land your ship and start exploring everything you find and can see. But if you're chasing a specific rumor, then odds are that you can find the fellow Hearthian on that said planet. Whenever you enter a planet's orbit and ship, if you pay close enough attention, you will happen to see the campfire smoke in the distance. This is where you'll find your space friends, if you need them. You can catch up with them about their travels and things you have explored. But these guys are also help in order to steer you towards what you might actually be looking for, while also potentially giving you newer rumors to check out. But not all astronauts are quite obvious, as some are hidden inside their planet. So if we remember what we learned back down on our village, then we could pull out our signal scope and track for their signal on said planet until we eventually find our way to them. For me, I'm most likely going to follow the main lead I have and check out the Outer Rock, visit Esker, and also potentially get a lead on the lunar ruins, which we originally got this rumor from the chunk of text from the lunar ruins in our museum. Are you kind of seeing how this works a bit? As we touch down into the moon, I decide to follow the visible smoke trail leading me to drop into a crater. We finally speak to the fabled Esker. Talking to Esker, we get the chance once again to learn some more lore about the space program, how the moon was used as a refueling station when ships launched from Timber Earth, since it was easier to not burn down trees on the moon. But as we talk to him, although we don't get any leads, Esker tells us about the poles. If we look on our little globe thing in the bottom right corner, we get a spherical diagram of the planet we are on with two lines on it, a red one and a blue one. Esker tells us that if we head to the red pole, we can go to a listening post he set up to listen to the other astronauts. Once arriving, we hop over a few wooden platforms until we come across some notes. Everything here is fine as we go through some logs that Esker wrote down. And as the days pass on, day 63, he hears something strange that throws him on. Then on day 70, he hears it again, although this time it's coming from our home planet, Timber Earth. But on day 76, things begin to get really strange. The noise he hears sounds like Feldspar's harmonica. But apparently, Feldspar went missing in space a long time ago, so hearing this must be very creepy. Then on day 88, he still hears it and decides to go talk to Nice, the lady who made our instruments. After reading this alongside many other times, you learn new information. At the top of your screen, you'll get a ship log updated, which tells you that whatever you just learned got logged back into your ship. When you go back to read your logs, all new information is added in an order like this. And something you may start to notice is different rumors depending on what they're talking about have different colors, and this is what we know as the different quests that I mentioned earlier. For example, if you have rumors on Giant Deep, odds are they are green, whereas quests on the Hourglass Twins are orange. A very cool way to keep quests down in my opinion. So with this weird knowledge in mind, we know that there must be some odd things going on in this universe, but as we are left with that much information, we must move on. So with little information on the lunar ruins, what happens if we head to the south pole of this planet? As we float alongside the moon's surface, eventually reaching the blue pole, we come across a circle structure with decaying walls. This must be the lunar ruins. And so, if we stand in the middle, we notice surrounding us are 3 rings. And on the ground are 4 different signs. If we take this blue ball, we can move it by looking around and guide it into different slots. And once again, doing so, the 3 rings spin around us until locking on to the planet correlating to the sign. On the left, we lock on the Giant's Deep. We can hear the storms rage on from the planet from where we stand. Whereas the symbol to the right of it allows us to lock onto the location to the sun and hear the wind blowing across it. But to our left, separated from the 3 signs, is a different color sign, one that almost doesn't look like a planet. If we move the ball onto this one, the 3 circles spin around like crazy but struggle to lock on anything. What is this symbol and what does it mean? Heading downstairs, we come across a circular open area where we see a couple line walls similar to ones back in the museum. We can read them and, well, get some interesting information. Apparently the species, the nomai, designed this to be an eye of the universe locator, whatever that really is. Unfortunately, they couldn't track the eye with this device they made, so they decided that they'll start to build a more sophisticated one in the observatory on Brittle Hollow South Pole. Sound familiar? On top of this, we also see that the same blue symbol, but this time way larger on the wall. This is the logo for the Eye of the Universe. Apparently, whatever this is a very important project, as it's what brought the Nomai clan here in the first place. So now that we know that the Nomai aren't originally from the solar system and that they must have traveled here somewhere looking for whatever this signal was. As one of the benches lying around is a tape recorder left by our species. It belongs to Rybeck, and he mentioned that from what he translated from the walls that the Nomai went to Brittle Hollow next, so that's where he will also go. And so will I. Now, before doing so, if I like to quickly explore the rest of the moon and see what there could be. Now, we know what's on the poles, but what's on the equator of this planet? As we float around following the equator, we eventually plummet into a large crater on the planet, although dark, with a sky blue shards everywhere. We see a lamp and a pickaxe, and on the ground is a tape recorder left by another friend, Chert. He noticed that on the moon are shards similar to the ice from the original planet before Dark Bramble, and that when the planet exploded, they must have traveled all over the galaxy and wonders if they landed on any other of the astral bodies in our solar system. Interesting. If we keep moving across the equator, we come to an abandoned ship. Not quite sure if it's crashed or not, but what really does scratch my brain is the fact that it almost looks way nicer of a ship than the one I have. Why is this, and why did our species change resources? A question I wish I knew the answer to, and something really cool about this area is not too far from the crashed ship, we see a flag in the distance. Standing next to it, we can witness in person an example of a photo from the museum. Very cool component of the game design that causes me to be like, whoa, that's very cool. And finally, after seeing everything there was to explore on the moon, we head back to our ship, read our logs to see what we just learned, and head to the next stop, Brittle Hollow and the South Pole. Making way to Brittle Hollow South Pole and landing in front of the observatory, we can get out and can instantly start by seeing what we can assume is Rybeck's ship. Towards the observatory, we see 2 torches leading us down a flight of stairs, and sitting on the ground before the door is a log tape similar to the one we saw back on the moon. Listening to it, we understand that according to Rybeck, the main door into the observatory is locked, and that he's going to try to make it under the surface in order to see if there's a different way around, and that he's going to head towards the north ruins on the equator in order to see if he can access the way down from there. And as we get back in our ship and head to the equator, we can see that a lot of the planet over time has crumbled and fallen into the black hole due to the Holland's lantern. As we fly through in the distance, I can start to see some smoke in the distance. This is a lead, as maybe we can find Rybeck here. Landing near the crater of the ruins and jumping down, we can walk through the wall of one of the ruined buildings, where we come across a burnout campfire. campfire. In an abandoned sleeping bag, on the wall adjacent to a can of marshmallows, we find some pieces of paper stapled to the wall. Reading the notes, we obviously know that Ryback got here safe from the walk, especially with the giant lava moon. But that across the way in a building with roots growing out of it, that inside are some stairs leading down to the surface below, and that's where he went. So, doing exactly as he says, we go to the building and try to get in. But no apparent way is visible, but if we look up, there happens to be a gap in the tree, so we can try to jump into it, where, after doing so, there's a hole in the roof. Jumping down and following the stairs, we eventually come across our first instance of the gravitational crystals in person, which is really cool, as now we understand what circumstance that being able to walk on a wall really comes in handy, especially as we only know of it as a demonstration from the museum. Hopefully, this wasn't hell for Ryback, as from the notes we read before, he doesn't seem like the most outgoing person, yet brave. As we follow the crystal path, we end up on a hanging platform. As rocks crumble around us in the distance, we hear a banjo. Ryback must be close. On the wall, we see an illustration, almost like a guide between locations, and looking down, we get some more notes. Ryback mentions that he saw them out to the different landmarks on Brittle Hollow, but most importantly, he detected oxygen below, to which he traveled. So after following some more crystals down, well, halfway through, we start to have some intense music fill up the almost silence of space around us. We finally find Ryback, but with this music, I almost can't seem to focus on it anymore. As heading back out, I hop onto a tiny rock and look off in space, only to see that our giant sun is abnormally red, and as the music fades away, For the first time again, your eyes open up above you, an explosion and things start to fly into the distance, but mainly is just a distant planet among all the stars. As you arise from your sleeping bag, a campfire ahead of you rages on, and on the other side seems to be an alien, but to you, they are a friend. This is Slate, who seems to be wearing a welding mask, and he has no idea that the solar system just ended. Did we die? Is this heaven? Why am I back here? What just happened? As I go up to Slate, he seems to be normal, as if nothing happened, telling us that we need to go get the launch codes from the observatory. But we tried to tell him that we just died and that we've done this before. But he just calls us crazy. Running down into the village, we try to talk to people, try to get some lick of sense of what just happened, but everyone has the same thing to say. Maybe Hornfeld, the brains behind us all, knows something. Running up to the observatory in the entrance, we see Hal and Horfeld's admiring the statue, still with its eyes open. I guess something didn't stay the same. With no other choice left after witnessing the fate of our solar system and the ones we love, we must find our way back to the elevator, ride it up, and get back in our ship and do it all over again. Now, at this point in the game is where our objective takes a very drastic shift, but we are left a very obvious one. Now, as we go on to explore the universe to learn what happened to the nomai, we know that in the back of our mind that every 22 minutes the sun will eventually go supernova, and that we need to find a way to stop it, especially since we know the nomai had something to do with it as they invented a way for us to be sent back in time, hence the statue. With the sudden plot twist thrown into the boiling pot of information we already had, how exactly do we go about stopping the end of our solar system? And what is it really about Outer Wilds that make this game so interesting and unforgettable? Now, at this point, if you have made it this far in the video, thank you very much, it means so much to me, but if you happen to never have played Outer Wilds in your life, you by chance are thinking about turning this video off immediately. Put it in a playlist and come back to it when you're done watching it. Outer Wilds is a game that once you play it, you can never play it the same ever again, and that is the magic of this game, so go do that and we'll see you later. But for those of you who won't go play the game and
rather be intrigued by this video, or for those of you who have and just want to reminisce or see a video essay on one of their favorite games, well, thank you for being here and stick around as we go into the chaos of Outer Wilds. Now, as you explore your system, no matter how you die, rather it's quick or you make it to the end of your loop, whenever you do, all your memories are sent back in time 22 minutes to when the sun didn't explode. But why exactly is it 22 minutes, and why are we the chosen one for this phenomena? Every time we get into our ship, we are usually left with a couple options of how we go about this journey, whether it is to continue following the leads that we're going down, or to pursue a new lead or different planet in the event that we're stuck at a certain loop. Outer Wilds is this fascinating story about a four-eyed alien species in the dawn of their space travel capabilities, and this type of thing, for example, is seen by if you go into the observatory, you can find a few notes on the wall next to a photo of distant stars. Hornfels, through this photo, realize that the observed stars have moved further away and that the universe is expanding, which this scientific revelation for the species must have been insane, causing Hornfels to say that he needs to sit down for a moment, which exactly is probably quite the same to humanity when we first discovered such facts like these. But this little detail of a cute alien species making interesting discoveries is a main source of the magic spread throughout the game. You as a player making these specific revelations as you go, discovering new clues, and solving puzzles to figure out how to navigate your solar system. And as you go throughout this game, using your trusty translator tool, you over time are fed pieces of information and pieces of the story of this game one at a time. As you discover a new dialogue wall or a new area, what matters is the way the story is told to you as a player, whereas whenever you do find a clue, you aren't just simply told what this whole ordeal is about, instead are given a fraction. And the genius of this game is that as you keep going, you eventually keep gathering fraction and fraction until your system log is full enough to give you a for sure lead on what you're doing. Then after collecting enough clues, you immediately are hit with this aha moment, or this light bulb pops in your head when you go whoa and finally understand what it is that is happening in this game. But it's not only this, but as you read these text conversations, you aren't just being told what is happening or where to go, but you're following in the footsteps of an ancient wiped out species that in a way also had their own journey that they were going down. Then as you read, you continue to learn the things they discussed and attempted. You're brought along with them on their journey, almost learning the things they went through as if you were one of them. Things they found interesting or troubling, such as how to access the quantum moon, or the numerous pieces of technology they set up to discover how exactly to find the eye of the universe. And it's this storytelling alone that made me keep going. It didn't feel like I was stuck reading logbooks in a video game for some extra lore, but instead it felt as if I was on this never-ending grand journey that just got more interesting as I went. And so with that being said, I'd like to go into puzzles. When it comes down to the puzzles of Outer Wild, it's these little trip-ups that sometimes make you stare at something for a while, purely confused and wondering how to get into a certain building or get through to a certain part of the planet. And what I really enjoy the most about these puzzles are that they taught you in a way that almost interconnects everything. For example, when one is tasked with trying to get into the center of Giant's Deep, they have no idea how because of the big current, but after reading around on the construction yard, they discover that they couldn't get under due to a form of cyclone spinning in an opposite direction. But as the player are told to go find this information on Brittle Hollow's South Pole, which you can't access easily, so even getting inside is a puzzle of itself. But once you do get inside the current, there's another barrier of how to get through the lightning core, which then you discover after meeting Felspar, who tells you to follow his ship, which once doing so, you discover that the inside the jellyfish swimming in and out are insulated from electricity. And all of that is just for one puzzle. Or how when attempting to get through Dark Bramble, you keep awaking the anglerfish with no idea how to not do so, which for a long time, you don't figure out until you visit the Sunless City on the Ash Twins and learn through something as trivial as a children's game, that the anglerfish are blind, so that the kid who is the tagger is blindfolded, which teaches you that if you float through Dark Bramble quietly, then you won't be attacked. But on the flip side of things, this game puzzles also come in different varieties, with a couple relying less on information and exploring, and more on understanding physics. For example, such as getting inside the interloper, which for a while you realize that there's no way to, but when you notice that when the interloper gets closer to the sun on its orbit, the ice melts. Or when Brill's Hollow, or on Brill Hollow, when you have no idea how to get inside a tower of quantum knowledge, as the path up is very broken, and because of gravity, you just can't float up there. And this puzzle took me way too long until I realized that when this planet breaks apart, I can wait for it to just go through the black hole and be able to access it, which opens this rabbit hole to time-based puzzles where you can't access them if you rather wait too late into your journey, such as accessing the Sunless City, or being able to go to the Ash Twin, which isn't accessed until all the sand has come, in a sense letting you explore both sides of the hourglass, the first half and last. But sometimes when you do these puzzles and make these revelations, the way they are showing to you sometimes unexpectedly opens up a bunch of different things to explore in your universe. For example, when finally getting to the high energy tower, heading upstairs, you see these murals of different towers lining up to different planets, which causes you to start checking out the towers on Ash Twin and warping to the different locations they send you, which in the first place you didn't learn about warp technology until falling through the black hole and ending up on the white hole station, which tells you firsthand about warping technology, which we knew existed all the way back at the museum, as we learned that their scout has a warp core on it invented by the nomai. And so with this eccentric chaos ball of a game, we get to firsthand see all these amazing wonders of game design and storytelling that come together to deliver us this amazing experience of a game. But with all this talking of how good this game could be, what exactly is it about, and just how exactly do all these shenanigans come into play? Well, to give you guys a quick summary in the game, here's what Outer Wilds is about. Outer Wilds kicks you off with you and your species known as the Hearthians and the dawn of their space travel abilities. When you wake up, it's finally your day to launch. After talking to your fellow friends and family on your way out, you are given your launch codes, and also by your friend Hal, a translator tool, which allows you to decipher an alien species in your solar system by the name of the nomai. Once you use the launch codes, you can access your ship for the first time and hit the cosmos. As you travel, you start to explore planets and monuments on them. As you start to read, you discover a huge mystery unfolding before your eyes, as this ancient species, the nomai, didn't really originally from the solar system, that something brought them here, something by the name of the Eye of the Universe. And as they followed it, they followed the signal in the dark bramble, which almost became their species' tomb, as 3 escape pods were launched out from the ship, with only 2 actually making it onto the other planets in the solar system. These 2 different ships and their inhabitants race to find shelter inside their said planets, and develop cities where they can live comfortable and do research, when all of a sudden, some of them on both planets spotted a wandering moon in the sky. In this curiosity both to track the signal and the moon, the species were determined to keep building and developing technology to track it until they eventually developed technology to reunite with each other, and also make way to other planets in the solar system, being able to explore and build upon Giant's Deep, and even visit Timber Earth for mining. But as for their hunger for information on where the Eye of the Universe really was, their ideas got bolder and bolder, until eventually they thought that they could find the Eye of the Universe by building a sun station and attempting to fire energy onto the sun to create a supernova, which once doing so they realized it didn't work, and so instead decided to go check out a comet entering the species' solar system. And upon landing on it and finding their way in, the core of this comet ruptured at a high pressure with a deadly substance called ghost matter that wiped out their entire species, calling an end to the nomai. But then 200,000 years later, our species, thriving and living, who evolved according to the nomai from tadpoles in the water and Timber Earth, evolved and eventually learned how to travel ourselves. But when one day one of these ancient statues lock onto us and show us our memories, our sun explodes and we are left in a time loop. But where did this time loop come from? Well, it turns out that according to Statue Island, that the nomai designed these statues to relay information to the nomai if the Eye of the Universe was found or in case of emergency. But every time we die, we are paired to one of these nomai masks inside a certain structure we can't identify. But throughout the entire game, all the clues we learn all tie into one big piece of the puzzle called the Ash Twin Project, which we learned we can access through the towers on the Ash Twin. Doing so, we learned that the Ash Twin Project was designed to power the supernova caused by the sun station, which we learned never actually worked. But that also is the cause of our time loop, as we finally see the source of the mask that we are tied to. But if we are able to stop the artificial gravity inside here, and upon the warp core, we can float up and pull it off. And once the sun explodes, we have finally ended our loop and our solar system peacefully as it goes out with a bang. But that's not really the end, is it? Well, actually, Outer Wilds, interestingly enough, has multiple endings, but only 2 of them are real. But instead of the ending being a choose your own adventure type of deal, instead you experienced both endings in the same playthrough. Basically, you got an ending to your ending. And after you discover how to stop the time loop, you learn about the warp core you stole from the Ash Twin Project just might have somewhere else useful it could be. But before I talk about the real ending of the game, I want to do something I've been wanting to do for a very long time when it comes down to dissecting Outer Wilds. Something I don't really see other video essayists do. You see, as every player plays through the Outer Wilds experience, we learned that the story through their own eyes, our own adventures, and through the leftovers of the nomai before they met their fate. But no Outer Wilds playthrough is necessarily the same. You see, before writing the script, I actually forced like 4 different friends to play through this game, and I got to see many different ways people play this game or how they process the information on their journey is compared to each other and originally my own. But something that I noticed throughout all these playthroughs is we never actually learned the story in a linear sense, and so I decided that it would be fun to try and exactly follow in the nomai's footsteps in the most chronological order I possibly can and link together how everything really happened. And so at this next section, I present to you the nomai's story. During our journey, as we wander around and gather information, we will eventually come across our first clue on how the nomai originally got to the solar system, and it all starts with Esker's clan. You see, the nomai, believe it or not, are, from what we can tell, are far off but an abundant species to the point where they had different clans who all had different ships. As the nomai went on in their space travel journeys, we understood that other nomai clans were aware of the mysterious signal produced by the Eye of the Universe, but no one took the initiative to track it down. This is where Esker's clan differs, as during one random flight, they picked up the signal again and made their way to our solar system. But for whatever reason, their random jump became their fate, as when they jumped, they landed in the depths of dark brambles, soon ensnared by the spiky vines of the seed. At this point, the vessel started to lose power and functionality as the nomai panicked. The remaining crew funneled into life pods and launched away in order to escape. 3 life pods specifically were launched, one heading to the Hourglass Twins, the other in the direction of Brittle Hollow, but for the third one, it did not make it so far, as it found itself damaged from multiple collisions, stranding its crew somewhere else in Dark Bramble. As the crew were running out of breathable oxygen in their pod, they were forced to disembark and set out to follow the vessel's signal in hope to repair it or be rescued. But as they followed the signal, they came across a seed too tiny for either of them to fit through, where they would then meet their fate. Now, while there are other 2 escape pods, I'm going to decide to go one by one in order to capture exactly what happened to the nomai in each planet. Now, something I'd also like to point out here is that during your journey, as you translate the nomai's text, you'll start to figure that the nomai were around so long that they were able to have multiple generations. Starting with the nomai in Brittle Hollow, landing on the surface near a cannon into the crust, we have 4 nomai: Thatch, Felix, Plume, and Kusa, who at this point lost contact with Escape Pod 2 and 3. And as they scanned their environment, they noticed that they had enough oxygen and solar power for a suitable refuge. But as they gathered themselves, a new problem arose. Hollow's lanterns, Brittle Hollow's lava moon, was making its way back around the planet, and this threat forced them to carefully construct wooden platforms down below the surface so that they could survive, eventually leading them to the construction of the Old Settlement, or for them, was their first home on Brittle Hollow. Here, the nomai mainly gathered their thoughts and feelings on their missed loved ones, and mourning for their potential losses. The members also met together in order to write down their knowledge of the Eye in case something were to happen, and at one point they discussed the work core of a ship and if an error was made because of it or if the destination was the problem. Eventually, because of the settlement's stability, the few decided that it would be time to attempt to construct a more stable and permanent environment, which, using leftover gravity crystals, they were able to create a path under the planet's crust to our next location, the Hanging City. Now, a lot of the information we find here is actually from the 2nd generation, which I don't want to touch on yet. But for what I could say about our original crew is, from what I could tell, this crew was able to develop most of the Hanging City on their own, including the towers and bridge leading to the crossroads. Now, the Hanging City, which unavailable to us due to time, used to route a little village on the northern glacier of this planet. Up here is where we come across a conversation discussing their discovery of a phantom moon that sometimes orbit their planet, according to Brittle's lantern. They noticed that the moon sometimes disappears and stayed like that for numerous days, while eventually coming back every now and then, sparking some curiosity. And at this point, this is the last of the Brittle Hollow's crew that we could read on. From here, and while there are potentially some other leads on where they might have gone next, I'd like to now switch over to the Ember Twin crew. Opening up for the Ember Twin on the surface, we could once again find another beam into the sky. This is Escape Pod 2, which harbored Anana, Coleus, Mallory, Burr, and Reese. As the crew lands, their ship does a scan on the land when they find out that the surface temperature is too hot and that is inhospitable. Luckily for them, this is where they discovered that when their escape pod crash landed, they opened up as an entrance to what seemed to be caves below the surface. So this is where they head. The crew would all head different directions throughout the maze-like cave systems until eventually Mallory comes back with news that she found a massive cavern at the end of her path, where they could potentially set up a shelter city. Which, doing so and guiding their passengers along what probably was once an easy path, we find ourselves at the Sun City, which they developed over time. Now, while the Ember Twin crew's dialogue is way shorter than Brittle Hollow's, there still happens to be a few moments that they shared. One of the biggest ones is specifically that Mallory, on top of one of the planet's vantage points, noticed that the planet sometimes has a moon, and by looking closer, also travels to the other planets in the solar system. So during their curiosity, they decide to build a tracker for it, where at this point, they examine that the moon sometimes isn't trackable and that it potentially has a 6th location. Now, beyond this, the last little bit we get to hear about the Ember Twin crew is that their random discovery of a random rock with a unique texture and color. Not only this, but they noticed that the same rock appeared at the bottom of the dry lake bed that they originally saw it at. Because of this, the couple Mallory and Coleus decided to head back to the dry lake bed, where they discovered that sometimes the rock is there and other times it is not. This phenomenon leads them to believe that the rock is very similar to the planet's wandering moon, but eventually as they're exploring, Coleus goes missing and the rock is gone as well. In panic, Mallory sends a message to the Sunless City in order to help in looking for Coleus. Now while the search ensues, Coleus finds himself alone with the rock in a completely new location than it was before, which then disappears, leaving him stranded as he looks away. For Mallory, this must have been terrifying, as when they found the rock again, it didn't have Coleus on it. Luckily, the rock came back to Coleus and he traveled with it back to his crew, where eventually they discovered a new quantum rule. And so with this is the last we have of the text from the first generation of Nomai, at least a generation alone. So now at this point is where the story starts to kind of fall through, as specific details aren't exactly given to us on how things progress from here, which is okay, as it allowed us to do some fun theory crafting and look a little harder at the world that this game has created for us. And so with this, I present to you the reunion phase. Now at this point, the two crews would have had to get back in contact in order for the rest of the story of Outer Wilds to happen, but just exactly how did they do this? Well, the leading theory is due to the abundance of gravity crystals that the Brittle Hollow crew had, and on top of this, they would also go on to build the Gravity Crystal Workshop in order to build more, which at this point, since they already bridged to the crossroads, they would have gone on to eventually develop a gravity cannon, which here, they would put together a basic shuttle with their supply of crystals, set off towards Ember Twin's escape pod. Now assuming that they had just followed the Ever's crew path in order to find them, they would then develop a gravity cannon on Ember Twin as well, and for the meantime, this would be the Nomai's main source of travel between each other using shuttles. Now at this point, where both crews would head next could honestly be anywhere, but for our sake, the first dialogue we find with both crews together is on top of the Outer Rock, where at the Lunar Ruins, we read about the crew's attempts to build an eye signal locator in order to pick up where their journey originally left off. And the eye signal locator was able to locate the different planets, but couldn't find the eye signal, unfortunately. Now due to this difficulty, the Nomai decided that the Southern Glacier Brittle Hollow has way more space in order for the construction of a new building in order to inhabit a more sophisticated building for the Eye of the Universe.
So it is now at the Southern Observatory where our story for the first generation of Nomai reside, but it's not entirely their end for the Nomai's journey, as they still appear in conversation. Now where the second generation come in is where we start getting to a lot of our bigger and more important projects when it comes down to the Nomai's journey. The second generation of Nomai made themselves really busy when it came down to this journey, and from what we can gather, it was almost as these children were raised solely to wonder about the Eye of the Universe and the Quantum Moon. Now interestingly enough, the way the stories are told to us of the second generation of Nomai actually differs, as instead of being planet specific, the Nomai happen to be project specific, as we learn about them. But to kick us off, we continue with the Southern Observatory's eye locator. As the second generation got older, they must have learned that the locator didn't actually find what they were looking for. So in this event, they decided to hold a meeting in the Southern Observatory where they discussed new methods of locating the eye. And from here, we have our newest members of the Nomai, Avens, Kanoi, Mallow, Privet, and Cassava, who discuss that maybe there is a chance that they can find the Eye of the Universe instead by seeing it, instead of by hearing it or reading it. So with this, the Nomai decide that if they can design a probe and a way to fire that probe, they could further their odds of finding the eye. Leaving behind Kanoi and gaining a new member, Daz, the crew head over to Giant's Deep, where they land on one of the islands and build the construction yard. The idea is that the Nomai will build a probe cannon, and that they can launch into orbit using one of Giant's Deep's cyclones. From here, the cannon will continue to fire probe after probe until they are able to, hopefully in a Hail Mary attempt, to locate the Eye of the Universe. But before the cannon went out to fire off the probes, they needed a way to record that information. So taking a step back, we head back to Brittle Hollow, where we follow in the footsteps of Poke, Clary, Pi, and Raimi, with also the help of older Felix, where the Nomai must realize how annoying it must have been to accidentally slip and fall into the black hole right under your home. So in an attempt to not only create a fail-safe / retrieval method, they decided to attempt to recreate warp travel and build the White Hole Station, which waits for you right outside of a white hole if you happen to fall into the black hole. Due to this, the Nomai were successfully able to recreate warp travel, which opened up a new method of transportation in between planets. But what really mattered was that during Clary's return, Poke realized something on the time reader for the warp. When Clary warped back, the readings mentioned that he warped back to Brittle Hollow just a very small time before he warped from the White Hole Station. This now new and random phenomenon would go to create confusion between the few, wondering if there is an error or malfunction with their equipment. Once Poke goes back to the White Hole Station, no matter what, the readings are the same. Here is where a Nomai by the name of Raimi comes in, when they mention to Poke that him and Pi are going to recreate this phenomenon back at the White Hole Station on Ember Twin. Switching over to the High Energy Lab is where we get to see our first look at the generation Nomai that were working on the Ember Twin. Here in the High Energy Lab is where they would continue this confusion, but during their research they discovered that by using a black hole and white hole core they can recreate it, but Pi was unconvinced and so wanted to attempt adding more power to the project. So by rerouting all of the Sunless City's power, they were able to power power of a test even more when something surprising happened. What Pi and Raimi discovered was that depending on how much energy a warp core is allowed to use, then the time interval that something warps drastically increases. This causes the question of, is it possible to send things hypothetically 22 minutes back in time? Which is really interesting because now we get an in-game reason to why our loop is exactly 22 minutes that fits in with the narrative. A very, very neat idea that is another reason to why I love this game. And now from here is where some of the workers from the second generation from both sides now start to discuss and interact a bit more. What they discuss is being able to start the main project of this game, the Ash Twin project, which they discuss that they're going to build it. They're going to need a way to get between the planets easier besides shuttles. So this is where they discuss creating the warp towers on the Ash Twin in order to have an easy link in between the Ash Twin and also every planet there. But with knowing where they want to build the Ash Twin project, just exactly how are they going to be able to? Well, this is where we find ourselves in the Meltwater district, where we see that the nomai hold a huge meeting with almost most of the second generation nomai and a couple new members. Here, they talk about how they'll get their hands on an advanced warp core in order to harness the energy needed for this 22-minute interval. At first, they mentioned to go to the vessel and attempt to recover the old warp core they used to get to the solar system in the first place. But the idea is shot down as the warp core was remembered to be broken, and that dark bramble is not worth the loss of life that previous generations of nomai had to endure. And so they move on to their next plan, to develop an advanced warp core, a unique version that hadn't been seen before from the nomai. This is where Poke is put onto the spot, as he was the apprentice to Anona, who's the original nomai in their clan who was responsible and knew how to build their original warp core. And so with Poke's knowledge, he heads to the Black Hole Forge, where Poke and Clary work together in order to develop the advanced warp core, which they eventually do, and transport it to the Ash Twin project. But before we head back to Ember Twin, I do want to talk about the two nomai who are mentioned in the big meeting that we've never met before. And this is Oneo and Sakade, which these two nomai instead head to Timber Earth at the meeting, where they are responsible for a large mining operation on Timber Earth, in order to get enough ore to create the protective casing inside the Ash Twin project. But why exactly does the Ash Twin project need a protective casing? Well, if we find ourselves back at the Sunless City, we come across a conversation, the first great controversy and debate that the species has with each other, the building of the Sun Station. Introduced by Poke, the idea is to build a station that orbits the Sun, with the goal to generate enough energy to activate the Ash Twin project, creating a 22-minute interval back in time by prompting a supernova from the Sun. Now obviously, some people like Idea and Coleus were heavily against this idea, but for the project leaders, Pi and Poke, that they believed that this was the only way forward, as there was no other way to create that much power in the nomai's lifetime. Now with the idea of possibly causing a supernova of the solar system's sun, the chance of wiping out your entire clan for something that may or may not be possible is honestly too big of a risk. So this is where we find ourselves back at Giant's Deep, where we are with Floz, Daz, and Yarrow, where on Statue Island, Phlox finds himself sculpting a bunch of statues, but not any normal statues. These are the pairing statues, specifically the ones we see in our museum. The nomai decide to build these statues to pair with the nomai, so in the event that the Sun Station failed, their memories would be sent 22 minutes back in time in order to act as a failsafe, especially in case a time loop were to happen, so that the nomai are able to realize they are even stuck in one, as we find ourselves in during the game. The statues are paired with masts that lie inside the Ash Twin project itself, which are hooked up to the energy from the core, keeping everything as one database. And so upon doing so and going back to the Sun Station, they construct it and head up to where here the nomai prepare to fire the Sun Station. And when they do, nothing happens. Depending on how you see it, fortunately and unfortunately, the Sun Station did not work, as when they fired the Sun Station into the Sun, it barely even affected it. In the nomai's failure and disappointment, they get a message from Yarrow telling them to come back to the Ash Twin immediately, as they have a new objective. The nomai have detected a foreign comet entering their solar system. Moving on, we follow as Poke, Pi, and Clary all funnel into a shuttle in order to launch to and land on the Interloper. As they do, they land on the dark side of the comet, where the shuttle begins to get frozen over by the Interloper's ice. In the desperate attempt to not get stuck on the shuttle, Pi and Poke leave Clary behind to keep the shuttle warm. As the two travel to surface, they start to get a sort of energy reading from inside the comet. Eventually finding their way in, they go deeper and deeper, and as energy readings are higher, they get to the center of the comet, where they find a large energy core. Pi and Poke investigate it, and they begin to realize that the energy reading inside that core is over exceedingly high levels, and that if it were to burst, and from what they can tell it is about to, that whatever the substance is will coat the entire solar system and become fatal. Pi realizes this and sends Poke to go to the rest of the nomai to go on to build shelter from this lethal matter, and that Pi will remain behind in order to keep an eye on the energy. Before Poke can get very far, The interloper's core finally ruptures from the pressure as it gets closer to the sun, and from the Ghostmire explosion, the nomai meet their fate. But the nomai story isn't just completely over yet. You see, as we go throughout the game, piecing together and learning the story, we start to come across a more separate side story. Not only does this story not only just follow one nomai, but this nomai also is only nomai we see in the game recorded throughout the different generations. And this is Solomon and her journey to the Quantum Moon. As we explore around, a cool detail about Outer Wilds you can actually interact with is what the third generation of nomai were doing, although we mostly know of them as they were kids. Whenever you come across a line of dialogue that's super scratchy and messy, odds are you're reading a conversation between children, which in my opinion is such a cool detail, as of course kids are going to have lesser defined skills. This third generation of nomai consists of the Lami, Levi, Teget, Elix, and Solemn, which we see as school kids, and also the same kids who teach us exactly how to get through Dark Bramble safely. Although the school kids didn't get far enough to make any significant progress for the nomai, Solomon was different and is a very important story to us. The first time we really read about Solomon is in the Sunless City, where she resides. As we come across one of her notes, she mentions that she doesn't understand the craze about the Eye of the Universe, and that if it really did want to be found, it wouldn't have led their species to the solar system just to be trapped. But eventually, as time passes, Solomon's mind changes, as we can see from her time at the school. Solomon again talks about the Eye and also the universe, that she knows that one day the universe will just keep expanding and everything will die. But where her new belief lies is that the Eye of the Universe isn't actually malevolent, but instead indifferent, as the Eye doesn't seem to mind if it is found or not, but it also doesn't wish harm on others. And it's this thought process that eases Solomon's mind, but also that she seems to be content with the conclusion that the Eye does not care for sentient ideology. So with this, eventually Solomon grows up and we see the only portion of the third generation of nomai in the game with her journeys to the Quantum Moon. Now, as we follow the Quantum Moon in the game, the way we do tend to be the most unclear puzzles in the game, kind of the ones where we are forced to just stare at something till we get that light bulb, as there's no actual real explanation as to how to access them. Now, if we go back to what was mentioned by the nomai's first generation, we know that back on Ember Twin, that Coleus got lost in the Quantum Rock, causing Mallory to panic, and because of this created a new quantum rule for the nomai to remember, the rule of entanglement. But with this rule, there would go on to be two others that the nomai would learn over time, and Solomon would go on a great journey to prepare to learn them. Now, in order to learn the second rule, Solomon would be sent to the tower inside a giant deep's mega tornado, which can be accessed as someone flies under the current of it. If you're skilled enough, you can get in from above with just some right timing and careful flying. Here, the player is subjected to multiple mini-puzzles tests in order to capture the quantum objects with a camera in order to hold them in place. This is also where Solomon learns the rule of quantum imaging, which is a rule required for one to even be able to land on the moon in the first place. And so with Solomon finishing her tests and heading back to the shuttle in Brittle Hollow, Bells, the nomai in which I understand is the main nomai as Solomon's teacher, informs her that she's almost done, but has one more rule to learn, so she must make her way to the Tower of Quantum Knowledge, which for us, the player, we are forced to wait for it to fall through the black hole after crumbling, fly in, and read whatever we can in the short time that we still have. What we learn is here, Bells teaches Solomon of the third rule, and that the past nomai who have spent their lives following this moon, even some who never even got to travel in their lifetime, have built an important nomai shrine on the moon, and that for Solomon to be able to reach the sixth location, she must get the shrine as close to the moon's north pole as possible. Now for the player, it is apparent we must also do the same from what we learned, so by listening and following Solomon's story, we must locate the moon, take a quick picture of it, and land on it, find the shrine, and using the rule of quantum entanglement from the Ember Twin, we travel until we get to Timber Earth, where we can access the North Pole the furthest. Here, if we call the tower to it, we then make the move to the Eye of the Universe, where, as in other locations, it's just a rock wall at the door. Here, we are granted the ability to walk in. And as we continue in, our eyes widen as the distance we see a living and standing nomai staring our way. Running up to them, we could speak to Solomon, alive, the only living nomai we know to still exist here. Talking to Solomon is an obvious language barrier. She can't speak to us, so instead she creates speech rocks, which we can put in various combinations, which allow us to host a sort of one-way conversation with the nomai. Here is where we just simply discuss a nomai's direct perspective on the Eye of the Universe, the Quantum Moon, and even our species and theirs. This biggest thing we learn here is that the Quantum Moon is actually the Eye of the Universe's moon, meaning the sixth location has has us orbiting the eye of the universe, but we just can't see it, only the moon's reflection of it. And besides this, Solomon gives us an interesting piece of dialogue where Solomon realizes that she might not quite possibly be alive, as this is apparently her first time to the moon, almost 200,000 years later from the death of her species in the solar system. But not only this, after she tells us this, the evidence is real, as when we go into each different location on the moon, surely enough we can find Solomon's dead body entangled with the moon still moving, as we look back and forth, very, very morbid. But nonetheless fascinating, as it ensues that Solomon is able to be alive and dead at the same time. And from what we know, because of Solomon being in the 5 locations dead, that she was still affected by gravity and time, but for her almost seemingly immortality on the 6th location, this could possibly state that time does not exist in space itself. And so from what we learn after saying our farewells to the last living nomai, we part ways and head on with our new information to finish our journey. That is the end of the story for the nomai in our solar system. Now, although the nomai in our solar system are dead, luckily they weren't actually the only nomai to exist, and so we aren't able to ever meet them or see them. Back on the vessel on the wall adjacent from the SOS signal, we find a long conversation between what we configure as the modern nomai. These nomai consist of Canna, Bromi, Clem, Hyssop, and Neem, which from what I configure are all different leaders of different nomai clans. This dialogue we get is very interesting, as we can see the modern nomai in the same position as us. Canna calls out to the other clans of the nomai in order to inform them that this is obvious that the universe is dying, so scarce resources, the best plan for them is to all be together. Canna calls them to the glowing galaxy, where she mentions the black rock suns seem to be relatively stable in comparison to the rest of the universe. Bromi responds that they're on their way, when then Canna starts to worry and mentions that she hasn't heard from Neem, and that Neem was on their way but hasn't gotten into contact, which reminds Bromi of the old grandfather story of Esker's clan, a nomai myth to the modern day nomai. According to Clem, they remember hearing that story as a child, and that one day Eskel's clan stopped responding, causing the other nomai clan to search and search but to no avail. Then Hyssop steps in, mentioning that the story of Eskel's clan is not a myth, and that his ancestors spent a long time searching for them, but nothing ever appeared, and that it was the first time anyone has ever disappeared this way in nomai history. Then before more can said, finally Neem appears, mentioning that nobody better be comparing Neem's clan to Eskel, as they mentioned they are on the way but almost got caught in a supernova. And with this is what we know of the modern day nomai. And with all being said, we have now came to our conclusion of the nomai story and the remainder of the nomai species in a faraway galaxy for all we know. And so with what we know about the nomai's journey and exactly what they're going for, and how once we pull the core out of the Ash Twin project we end the loop, but just exactly what is the point of this game and how does it really end? Well, after pulling the Ash Corp, we decide to hop into our ship. We can decide to do what the nomai didn't dare to do on their own. That is to hightail it back to Dark Bramble and find your way to the vessel. If we remember what we learned from the nomai is originally they used a warp core to power the vessel, which they at one point planned to go back in and retrieve, but if we use the Ash Twin's warp core, we are able to replace it, and the power flickers on. But now what? Well, once doing so, at the front of the ship a pillar appears with a ball, and we could connect these lines using it, but just exactly what do we make with these lines? Well, remember when we went down that rabbit hole on how to get into Giant's Deep? But when we finally used the jellyfish to get inside the electric core, swimming down we discover surprisingly to our eyes the probe tracking module that fell into Giant's Deep when the probe cannon exploded. The information nomai found when this happened was none other than the eye of the universe. The nomai actually found it, and now although they could never be able to see it for themselves, for us, we now know that everything the nomai went through wasn't for nothing. The nomai fired 9,318,054 probes until eventually just one of them was able to actually pick up the eye of the universe, which was once thought impossible, right? With this information, our ship log is given to us a picture of the coordinates of the eye of the universe, and from here, once we're at the vessel, we can use this blue ball in order to type in the coordinates and punch it into the ship. The vessel warps. In front of us lies the eye of the universe. Turning around, we can move the ball to the other side of the pillar, which opens up a black hole, and entering it, we are the first living being to ever see the eye of the universe. As we walk, the ground ahead of us curves, and in the near distance, we see lightning in the clouds ahead, all pulling into an orb-like structure. The ground appears around us the same as what we saw from the quantum moon when we met Solomon. A purplish oil-like color pattern fills the entire place. Surrounding us is what appears to be rock-like structures, almost resembling the ones all over over our solar system. The more we walk through, an almost haunting sound could begin to be heard as we approach the storm even closer, until eventually darkness. But not for long, as lightning starts striking the ground all around us, almost jump scaring us, spawning trees and quantum rocks alike phasing in and out of our observation, as if we ever really had the choice to see it or not. Luckily, when the trees phase in, we are granted oxygen, which who knows if we need it at this point. Eventually we get to the center of the storm, where we see a massive spiral heading upwards. Sitting below it is a massive crater of some sort, which if we walk along it, we can stick to it and walk closer to the spiral, where against all reason, we fall into it. Plummeting into what felt like endless depths is when I truly felt dread during this game, as in every possible direction are countless spiral-like pillars filling whatever this reality we are in. Then, as fast as we fall, we eventually hit the ground. But this time it's familiar. We find ourselves back in the museum, which is strange, but this time it's really dark. And when I turn around, nothing but the abyss. As I walk around, you can read the notes under every display, but things are different. They all acknowledge the end of the universe. The nomai helped you reach the eye, the anglerfish will be missed the least, and our sun eventually collapsed under its own gravity and created a violent supernova. All these notes left to remind us that perhaps we really did make it to the end, leaving at least me with a melancholy feeling. Walking upstairs where our map used to be is now a giant white pile of what seems to be dust, which we can interact with. Instead of seeing the map of the solar system, we are presented with our observatory on the eye of the universe, surrounded by the glowing matter of the universe loaded with supernovas. Then we take control again and fly towards the white lights, where randomly we find ourselves in a forest. Similar to home, the forest is lit up with a swarm of stars accompanied by some soothing music, and all of a sudden, they start to slowly fade away one by one, and we find ourselves in darkness once again. Then, as we look around, the trees seem to be gone, but now replaced by what must be a quantum tree. As we flicker our light, it disappears and moves, and then it disappears again, but instead, we gain a new signal. Strange. As we pull out our signal scope, we lock onto the sound when all we can hear is breathing. Very, very creepy. As we move closer to this breathing, we run into our cells, then gone. Where we once stood lies a tree, which if we flash our light, it slowly one by one shrivels into a measly campfire. We can light it. The darkness is now lit with nothing but this campfire, but as we turn back, trees appear. Then a chair. Then Esker. In our excitement, we run up and talk to him, but all he has to say is, "Did you hear that?" Pulling our signal scope and aiming different directions, we hear the different instruments of our friends. As we hunt down each one of them, they are accessed by a certain mini-puzzle, all relating to each Hearthian in their own unique way, until eventually, back at the campfire, we have the whole band. If one meets Solomon during their journey, they can also find Solomon's mask, which is morbidly accessed from using the quantum observation to slowly build a tower out of their skeletons until eventually forming one of their shuttles. Hopping in it, you can launch the shuttle, which has you sort of fly until you see the nomai's mask floating in space. What's so cool about this is Solomon joins you and your friends at the campfire. Once having everyone, you could start to get everyone to play their instruments, and the Outer Wilds medley is played, and even Solomon joins in. Playing on her notepad, she adds a piano-like sound to the song, amazingly including the nomai in your species song. One final time, you and all your friends and even your new one gather around a campfire. Even if this happens to just be a hallucination or not, it's still really nice to be able to see our friends, even in this very absurd and slightly scary, strange place we find ourselves in. It's nice to be able to find comfort by the ones closest to us. As the band starts to play above the campfire, the smoke rises and starts to create a small but expanding orb. As they reach the end of their song, everyone goes quiet and watches as random images start to flash all over the crystal-like orb. Some images familiar, others random, and when the ball drops into the fire, and everything we know disappears into darkness, left with nothing but our own breath. A massive white explosion covers our screen, and we are consumed. We have witnessed the eye of the universe and the Big Bang of another. And with that, the universe has ended and a new one begins. We get a final little end credit scene, and after finishing the game, where as long as we remember Solomon during the creation, then the universe creates a new bug-like looking creature, and our experience of Outer Wilds has come to a conclusion. So, what was it all about anyways, or exactly why? You see, I remember playing through this game for the first time wondering how to exactly stop the time loop and thinking that after all my work getting into the Ash Twin project and ending it, that my job would be over, and that was indeed not the case. As I once warped to the eye of the universe, I understood that everything was completely out of my hands. All I could do was keep moving forward, and when I saw that no matter what, this was the end for not only me but everything I knew, and also my friends, was at the end of its journey. I remember when I first beat this game, I was left feeling almost empty, as if there was nothing left to explore, and that I have just played the best game I have ever played in my life. I'll admit, it was really difficult to actually find a game after this that honestly mattered this much or could bring me the same type of joy that Outer Wilds brought me, and to be honest, I just couldn't, which is why almost 3 years after beating the game, it still sticks to me as one of my top 5 video games of all time, an experience I'll never forget. And when I did beat this game, I remembered instantly calling my friend, the one who begged me to play this game, and sitting there chatting with him on the phone for hours, just discussing everything about how awesome this game really was. But after beating this game eventually, I had to move on and close this chapter of video games and move on to the next, just as the nomai did, and eventually you and your species of Hearthians did as well, at the final campfire at the end of the universe. And it's this final campfire that really made me feel this incredible feeling of sentiment that honestly I don't think I've ever felt in a game before. I mean, of course, most gamers feel that feeling of not wanting to get rid of that first wooden pickaxe that you started your Minecraft world with, or dropping that sick sword that you slayed your first dragon with in Skyrim. But in Outer Wilds, that feeling of sitting there with the ones you love, the trees you are so familiar with breathing, and the marshmallows you enjoy cooking so much, taking it all in one more time before it's time to move on and let go. Now, not to be a Sierra Madre from Fallout New Vegas meat rider poet, but this message of letting go is in my personal belief what Outer Wilds really means, and for a lot, the ending of Outer Wilds at the end of the day is truly ambiguous. But the message of letting go can also be so ambiguous in of itself, right? Letting go of what? Well, to me, I believe Outer Wilds is an important message in the matter of letting go of certain things, such as the inevitability of death or something as trivial as failure and not being able to achieve your goal at the end of the day, as we saw with the nomai who decided to continue research and fascination for new things whenever despair came their way, from when they were standing on their different planets and couldn't see their friends and family to keep on going after the failure of the sun station. The same way that after beating this fantastic game, knowing that there was no longer more to my journey, I moved on to the next, rather it was a different game or experiencing something new in my day-to-day life. And as I must do, as I've seen every other Outer Wilds video essay discuss, is how this game has personally affected them at some rough time in their life. Recently, during the last winter, my mind gravitated back to this game, as during the winter I found myself in a bad seasonal depression and struggled dealing with topics such as newly found anxiety and eventually the concept of death, which is something I usually never struggled with. But I remember looking back to this game as, of course, it's something I never forgot, and when making all my friends play it and finish it, I felt as if I got to re-experience that feeling I haven't felt in a really long time. And it was this feeling that almost brought me comfort with my anxiety, this message of letting go and how maybe it's not a bad thing for things to come to an end. And when the summer rolled around and I moved into a new place and things turned up for me, as I started to feel better and less anxiety. And so it was at this moment when I decided that I wanted to dive deep into one of my favorite games of all time and pay homage to what it is that I really loved about this game in the first place. But something I realized as I make this video is that it's not only just the ending of this game that bears a message, right? And so if not, and if there is nothing to learn from within the gameplay itself, then what exactly is it? Well, something I properly enjoy about the feeling of Outer Wilds is the exploration of this game, the feeling of excitement to see new things and to go on and explore every little bit of this game that you possibly can. Also deliver that feeling of cosmic horror and the dread of space that comes along with the good as well. Something players might learn as is if they go on to explore, most of the planets greet them with an ecstatic world to travel, but also a dangerous one. For example, almost every single planet will kill you in different ways. Timber Earth, although we can call it home, watch out for falling in the geyser, you can drown, or the opposite if it erupts and launches you into the sky, slamming you back onto the ground. Giant's Deep wants to throw you into space. Brittle Hollow has a literal lava moon with a black hole, which if it were for the White Hole Station would be a big huge issue. Dark Bramble sees you as lunch and the Ember Twin will crush you with sand, or if you're unlucky, you'll puncture your suit and suffocate, or if you're a little off on your flight, you can find yourself plummeting into the sun. Yay. But besides the ongoing death and the fact that you're in a time loop and constantly dying, then maybe you might find yourself comforted by the mellow soundtrack of this game as a sweet guitar plays for the first time and becomes Stay in Your Village, or when you first leave for the stars. And if you stop and look around for a moment, one might realize how much of a camping vibe that this game has got going on for itself, as whenever you find one of your space friends, they're just posted up playing their instrument next to a campfire with everything they need, such as sapline, marshmallows, and a sleeping bag nearby. This aesthetic for the game was actually on purpose, as the creator of this game
Alex Beecham was mainly inspired by his love of backpacking. That as he grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, many of the locations of this game were actually based off of national parks, with places, for example, like Timber Earth was inspired by the trees of Redwoods National Park, with the giant geysers inspired by Yellowstone National Park, which is really cool as I live so close to it. The massive mountain like geysers inspired by Mount Rainier in Washington, a cool nod to the inspiration for the amazing look of this game. And for you yourself as the player, whenever you fly off into space and find yourself at some random corner of the solar system, taking in information at time, it can be lonely and quiet with the only sound you hear is your own breathing. Well, luckily for you, you can always just pull out your signal scope and listen to the skies to hear your friends playing no matter where you are. That every time the loop starts, or even in the middle of adventuring, no matter what, your village is always there in the loop. And that whenever you feel lonely, you can always come back and chat with them if you'd like, giving this nice feeling of home whenever you feel far out and away from it. And with the nomai, even we see in their species their affinity and connection with each other, as in the darkest of moments, their first thought on their mind is each other, that they never really tend to work alone. They always have someone going with them, and it's the feeling of connection that I believe really gives us an answer to what the main message and feeling of the main game brings, besides that chase for answers. And the non-stop feeling of keep on going is that every now and then, when you are reminded of the importance of relationships and connectivity, and the ability to love and care for the ones around you. But what if that feeling of friends isn't on your mind, and that as you keep going, instead you have that looming feeling of doom as you know the loop will come to an end? Well, luckily for you, according to Alex Beecham, that looming feeling of doom is inspired from the game that mainly inspired Outer Wilds, and that is Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. According to Alex Beecham, during the events of Majora's Mask, the player will have 3 days to stop the moon from crashing to the planet. That as you play, you develop this feeling of dread or almost of you being on a clock. Because of this, we now have Outer Wilds 22-minute supernova. But something that I really appreciate Outer Wilds for is its ability to make me way more interested in space than I already was. For example, Outer Wilds deals with a lot of space theories, concepts, and actual phenomena that we are aware of in our day-to-day life, and it's these different concepts that make this game so fresh and interesting to play around in. For example, off the bat, we understand the sandbox of Outer Wilds with its push and pull physics, and how in space your speed is determined by how fast you're flying forward or how fast you're able to pull back with your thrusters, causing you to travel forward unless something stops you. This concept allows for error and can cause you to simply explode as you crash into a planet going Mach Jesus. Although not an impressive concept, but the idea of differing gravities of certain planets all have effects on the way you explore said planet is also a fun concept, as for example a place like Giant Steep, which has 3.0 gravity, which for certain places like Statue Island has once you find your way inside. Up top you notice a little ledge, but since the gravity is too heavy you can't reach it, so you're forced to wait for a tornado to pick you up and put you in space in order to get there. Or for a place like the Interloper, which is a very icy place and doesn't really have any gravitational pull the deeper you dive in. The concept of moving really fast and all over the place with clouds of deadly ghost matter scattered is just a couple of interesting examples of using something as simple as gravity to create this diverse challenges. One of the big components of the Outer Wilds series is the idea that black holes are essentially portals that exit from white holes. This is called wormhole theory, which suggests that in our reality there are instances of tunnels in between space-time, of which are basically ways to warp through space. That at least my caveman way to explain it, and I actually didn't know this theory existed until I played No Man's Sky when it first came out, which the game also has random black holes which if flying into it will send you to another random planetary system which has you exit out of another black hole. Dark Bramble, which unfortunately is the least fun planet to find yourself in, does have some interesting tropes of itself, as you can experience interdimensional space, or for you Doctor Who fans out there, the TARDIS effect, which is another scientific idea that an object or place somehow carries the ability to be bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside. For example, when you approach a Dark Bramble, the place originally acts as just a seed, but if entering it, you find yourself in a massive area, which is actually the biggest space in the game itself, littered with other seeds that also just keep going. Quantum mechanics is, of course, in pair with the Eye of the Universe, is a big phenomena that we witness on almost every planet and even the moon. As we understand even the Eye of the Universe is quantum, the two biggest quantum ideas we see represented in Outer Wilds is quantum superstition and quantum entanglement, which we use both in order to help us basically meet Solomon and reach the Eye of the Universe. Quantum entanglement is the idea that two quantum molecules can basically combine in some way and meet the same fate, no matter the distance that the fate might be, which we see with the quantum moon, as we entangle with it to travel to the Eye of the Universe, or when following Coleus rock in order to discover what happened to him. Quantum superstition is a big proponent of the rock moving whenever you're not looking at it. This is the idea that quantum objects can exist in all spaces at once, unless the said object is being observed. One of the big examples of this is Schrodinger's cat, where when the box is closed, the cat can either be dead or alive, whereas once the box is opened, it's either the cat is dead
or alive, changing the state of the said result. Outer Wilds actually has an analogy to this theory, as when we meet Solomon, she's alive when we see her at the eye, but in the other 5 states of the moon, she is dead. And finally, with my favorite component of Outer Wilds and astronomy, is the theory of how the universe will end. In our existence, we believe in 3 ways that eventually our own universe will end. These 3 ways consist of the heat death of the universe, the big rip, and the big crunch. Now, doing some research, I couldn't actually find a way that the universe ends in Outer Wilds, so here's where I'm going to take an educated guess. Now, we know that the universe is coming to its natural end, and that all stars are dying in this universe. Now, because there is no more heat left in the universe, we can figure that this is just the heat death of the universe, right? Well, quite possibly, but what is interesting is the way that the eye of the universe acts with, well, the universe, and how exactly did they understand it to be such an important thing besides curiosity? Well, because we understand the eye of the universe is almost likely a quantum black hole, and at the end of everything we witnessed the Big Bang, then the idea I have for Outer Wilds is a mix between the two, whereas the heat death and the big crunch happen at the same time, and that for whatever the eye of the universe was able to consume of the universe caused the big crunch, which is the idea that the universe would in some way all can be combined into one area, where it would collapse on itself and the intense pressure of matter would cause another big bang. In this sense, considering the universe as a never-ending cycle of life and death as we see in Outer Wilds. And so with my appreciation of the game done, I'd like to take a little bit to cover some more topics about this game as some honorable mentions before we conclude this video. But before we move on, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has made it this far in the video. If you have sat here ever sleeping, listening, or fully immersed in this video, thank you so much for your time, and please consider subscribing, and hopefully you enjoyed the rest of this video. Now that we covered most of the story and the philosophy portions of Outer Wilds, I'd like to dive into a few different categories of things in the game that I love to take a look at and discuss for a little bit. I think that there's no better way to start this than with the music of this game. The soundtrack of Outer Wilds has hand down got to be one of the most diverse and beautiful soundtracks I've ever heard in a game. Not only this, but the feel of songs relate so well to the moments or places that trigger them, as most of the music in this game only plays whenever you are in a specific area, as the game pretty much lacks ambient music. So I want to go through my favorite tunes in the game and talk about what makes them so special to me, starting with, obviously, Outer Wilds. The main theme of this game, and also the main theme of the Outer Wilds venture, as whenever you point your signal scope out to your friends, they're all playing their parts of the song, which is really cool in my opinion. Followed up by Castaways. This song is on the sadder end of things, as this track mainly plays whenever you discover a nomai tragedy, playing specifically at the nomai's grave in Dark Bramble, and also the interloper's core. This song, in my opinion, has this sad feeling of almost misfortune, as it sounds like a sad song being played out of a tape recorder with a more staticky, distorted piano plays. Sun Station. This track obviously plays on the Sun Station, but the implication of this place at this point in the game is where the tensions start to feel the most high, as not only does the player wonder what really happened at the Sun Station, but also the nomai didn't know if they were ever going to finally find the eye of the universe, or either kill themselves and the solar system. And so as the song plays, it's this more interstellar feeling vibe with intense synths going off, with an almost looping feeling to the melodic synth that plays as we orbit the sun. The Surge. This is a track that plays in the Southern Observatory and in the control module of the orbital cannon. This track is a more straight to the point song, as it brings a very investigative spy feeling to the whole ordeal, as whenever this song is played, the nomai are at a core point of their journey for the eye of the universe, and that it shows their determination and focus for their grand goal. The track, similar to the Sun Station, has a high-pitched melody that slowly plays over the track, but this time accompanied by a light drum beat that sort of resembles pots and pans. Towards the beginning of the song is a drony, wave-like sounding synth that carries the song into the more serious feelings. The Uncertainty Principle. While less of a song, this is almost distorted, creepy choir song that you hear the first time using the signal scope to locate quantum objects. The reason I added this track to the list is that it's still important to that feeling of dread when in my cute space game, I heard this radio signal for the first time and it genuinely made me freeze. End Times. This track honestly is iconic, as the first time you hear it, it's almost confusing and intense, but very beautiful. When hearing it, it drowns out almost everything else, causing me to really question if something was about to happen. But once it did, everything changed for me, including this song. As now, whenever I heard this song, my emotions completely changed to pure dread when the song starts playing, as when it does, you know time is almost up. And finally, Nomai Ruins. The song is great, as not only is it related to the music you hear when your loop is being reset and you're seeing your memories, but also the first time you chronologically meet the nomai at the eye locator on the outer rock, which is the first time you'll hear the track begin to reel out. This version of the song includes a slow and spaced out piano that keys away as I get this sense of almost feeling distant or wary, as if something has happened here, as this is your first insertion to meeting the nomai. But besides the jamming out to some epic space tunes, whether it be sad or happy, let's move on to our next section and talk about the achievements for this game. As after all, we have made it this far in the video, so we might as well earn something, right? Most other video games, when it comes to achievements, reward you for beating a mission or killing a certain amount of people with a specific weapon. But Outer Wilds, interestingly enough, has all of its achievements secreted and very vague in the name, even if you try to read it. None of Outer Wilds' achievements reward you for beating the game or entering a certain place, but instead of for doing some random shenanigans that you have no actual reason of doing, which is why I loved achievement hunting for this game so much. So here are some of my favorite achievements that Outer Wilds has offer. Starting with the most tame achievement is Harmonic Convergence, which simply requires you to just pick up every traveler's instruments all at once, completing the Outer Wilds song. Simply, all you have to do is fly away from the solar system a good amount until everything is one dot, and pull their signal scope out and you can hear the beautiful band. Or maybe you are feeling a little mean-spirited today, well you can unlock Mika's Wrath by taking their tiny little model rocket and flying it into the sun, which is actually harder than it looks, but really funny. But what if by chance you're feeling a little bit tired of the loop and you want to try and just fly away? Well, luckily you'll be pulled back by the statue regardless and be awarded it was worth a shot for trying to escape the sun's supernova. Now, a couple of the achievements actually require you to be a little skillful. As for one, you have Deep Impact, which requires you to fly so fast that you crash directly in the giant's deep, passing its current, which basically requires you to fly really far away from the solar system and fly all the way back, trying to guide yourself to giant's deep, hoping not to miss the planet entirely, or if you're unlucky, slam into an island and explode. And finally, for crazy achievements, we have Hotshot, which in my opinion is the hardest achievement in this game. Hotshot requires you to manually enter the sun station without using the teleporter, basically having to get into the orb of the sun without crashing into it, getting personal to the sun station and disembark from your ship and float into the sun station, all without dying, which honestly is really tough if it's your first time. But with all of these achievements being so secretive and allowing for players to go hunting for them, then just what type of Easter eggs does this game have? Well, starting off with a big thank you to all the wonderful people who helped back this game is the Fig Backer satellite, which if you look closely on the map for a red beeping dot, you can fly to it where you'll see a satellite, but it doesn't look like any satellite from either of the two species in the solar system. Not only did this Easter egg cause confusion of rather this is a hint to humans, but is mainly just a fun Easter egg that allowed Fig Backers to get an image they wanted posted on the satellite in the game. Now sometimes you need a good old Easter egg that is literally just an Easter egg. Well, in Brittle Hollow, if you walk between the gravity cannon to the Nomai's escape pod, you find a scroll under a very hidden tree. If one puts into a wall, it will display a scannable QR code which reveals the text of Pivot's Easter egg. Now going back to how we mentioned Doctor Who earlier, if one on Timber Earth finds Gabbro's poem in the Quantum Grove, they can go to Gabbro on Giant's Deep where he mentions wanting to sculpt sculptures out of quantum rocks, specifically make statues that creep up on you if you're not looking at them, similar to the ever famous Weeping Angels from Doctor Who. Now, little Easter egg throwback for anyone still watching, but remember at the beginning of the video when I saw that weird looking ship on Outer Rock and wondering why it looked more advanced than ours? Well, it turns out that that ship is actually an Easter egg of the ship from the alpha of the game, that the developers put it there as a little fun callback. And finally, my favorite Easter egg called Big Head Mode, where if one goes up to Esker's camp, to the right of his house is a tarp covering a bunch of supplies. If one sneaks back here, you can find a very expanded can of marshmallows which you can interact with. The next time you go to a campfire, you can try to roast a marshmallow, which this time it will be green and moldy. But if you cook it and eat it for the rest of your loop, everyone in the game will have a big head, including Solomon on the Quantum Moon. And now, as we approach the end of this video, it wouldn't be a proper end unless we discuss the different endings of Outer Wilds, as the endings of Outer Wilds are not only endings, but also Easter eggs and achievements tying everything a little bit together. But if we get a little sciencey and head to the high energy lab, we can go back and experiment with adding power to the warp core test and shooting our scout into it. But if we pay attention for a brief period of time, we can see that there are two instances of our scout since there's a delay in the time it exists. So if we try to pull the warp core right at the perfect time, we can accidentally create two scouts, causing this to happen. We also get a little fun version of the Outer Wild themes with a kazoo and a really sped up credits as a jokingly "good job, you did it, you messed everything up." But what if you wanted to get a little curious with the advanced horde core? Well, in Outer Wilds there are actually a couple other places you can go with them, starting with just deciding to leave the solar system. In the same fashion you earned worth a shot. You can also gain this achievement for the isolation ending, which one survives the initial supernova and stops the Ash Twin project while your character basically floats in space until running out of supplies. Not such a great ending. But what if you decide to show your new friend Solomon the cool new toy you found? Well, if traveling this quantum moon with the work core, if one chills at the 6th location with Solomon until the sun explodes, well, the player will be met with the same fate as Solomon, losing track of time. And for our final cool ending of the game, what happens if one hides inside the Ash Twin during the supernova? Well, after all, it was designed to survive the blast in the first place. So with this being said, you could possibly survive it in there as well, which when the supernova goes off, a black hole rips open in the middle of the project in order to send the info back in time. Well, if you jump into this black hole, you will wake up as if the loop continued on, but on your map you'll notice two different "you are here" markers. Going back to the Ash Twin, you'll walk up to the very surprising sight, yourself. You can engage with conversation with yourself, scream and get scared with yourself, and also discuss what happened in the first place. But during the second loop, if one doesn't continue the loop jumping in the black hole, then no continuation would have happened, also breaking the fabric of space-time, getting you the beautiful kazoo song once again. And so with the topic of endings being discussed, I think this is the appropriate time to let go of this video. It was a great journey, and I'm very glad to finally make it to the end of this project. This video took me 4 months to make, so if you enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate if you just break the fabric of space-time on that subscribe button. I am Gorg from Bozo, and I will see you in the next one. Have yourself a good night.